Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to equip your Deimos Predator for your Space Marine Legions. We're going to be focusing on the plastic kit that's just recently been released, so the weapon options that come in that. We're going to cover all the different weapon options and what they do, what they're good at and what they're bad at, what your considerations should be when choosing a loadout for your Predator, some recommended loadouts from me, some maybe more optimal ones, and then we're going to do a quick recap of vehicle strengths and weaknesses, and then we're going to look at some tactics you can use with your Predator as well. But before we do that, if you enjoy the content, please do leave me a like and subscribe. If you've got any feedback at all, please leave it on YouTube. And don't forget to join us on Discord as well, in the Heresy Discord community. A link can be found in the description below. And now, on with the show. The turret weapon options on the Predator are pretty good. You've got a few different ones. The first is the Predator autocannon, so this is what the vehicle comes with stock. Now, this is a pretty decent weapon. It's 8 shots, and it's also got rend and 6 as well, which is kind of decent. It is very cheap, though. All of the different turret upgrades on the vehicle cost 20 to 40-ish points, roughly, and that's quite a lot for a tank that's in the sort of 120 point-ish region to start. This is very good for its points, this gun, and it's so cheap in fact that it makes the other turret options look very, very expensive when you compare against them. Now, it's not an amazing gun. It's good versus most targets because it's got a decent amount of shots. It's strong enough to instant death Space Marines if it does penetrate their armor, either luckily or with rend. It's good enough to, knock chips off vehicles or dreadnoughts, that kind of stuff. It does get a lot better when you're Imperial Fists or Iron Warriors, for obvious reasons as well. But it's not a super good weapon, but it is very cheap, and it does keep the tank cheap, which is kind of nice. And it's really a great option. Plus, for me, a Predator with an autocannon is the most classic Space Marine tank that you can get as well, so I love the way it looks too. The next option is the Gravis Las Cannon. Now, this is also going to be super popular as well, the classic Predator Annihilator, although technically that didn't really exist during the Horus Heresy. So, really good choice for getting some big anti-tank shots into your army. It's 2 las cannon shots for 30 points, which is pretty decent. It's not expensive for what it is, but it does make the vehicle quite expensive, though. You got to remember, Predators are fairly easy to kill, so it does make it quite expensive, and you got to factor that in. But I expect this will also be a super popular choice on this vehicle, and with good reason. Then there's the Volkite Macro Saker. So however these are named, I have no idea what any of the Volkite weapons names are supposed to mean. So it's 8 shots of the same Volkite that you get from Volkite Culverin, so Strength 6, AP5 Deflagrate. Quite expensive for what it does, really, at 25 points, compared to other ways of shooting infantry that you can get in your army. Things like Volkite Culverins or Heavy Bolters on Space Marines, or just Space Marines with Bolters and those kind of things. For what you pay for this, it's not the best anti-infantry weapon in the world. On the upside, it can defensively fire, which is, good, because you can make a vehicle that actually is capable of returning fire. Or you can pair this with las cannon sponsons as well, potentially, which are kind of cheap, which keeps the cost of the vehicle down. So you can use this, and everyone loves a tune wagon. Everyone loves a fully Volkited up vehicle. And although for the cost of this with Volkite all over it, it doesn't compare that favourably to other anti-infantry options you do have in your army available, it doesn't mean they're on a tank, which is kind of good. It comes with its own advantages that we'll look at later. And again, I do think this will be a popular option despite not being super powerful. And then we've got the Graviton Cannon. Pretty cool thing to be able to put a Graviton weapon in the turret of your Predator. So it's 35 points, is very expensive. Comparing it to Gravis Las Cannon, if you are hunting vehicles, it is probably worse overall, generally most of the time, when you're shooting at a vehicle. But it probably is a little bit more consistent. Again, because it's got a very big template, so it's quite hard to miss with. It's mostly going to cause a glance. So if you're shooting at something like a Dreadnought, in some ways it might actually be preferable. Although that said, a 160-point tank doing 1 glance to a Dreadnought a turn isn't super attractive either. What it does give you is quite a big template for area denial for your opponent. I love grav weapons and the effect they have on the movement of the enemy army, particularly when you're playing objective games. So maybe the best way to think about this weapon is it just shoots out a big chunk of area denial to stick on the board, and can also, knock a few hull points off things here and there as well. And again, don't forget, it is a defensive weapon because its strength isn't greater than 6. It doesn't have a strength characteristic. So unless that gets FAQ'd, it's a defensive weapon as well, which is kind of nice. Onto the Sponson options now. So the heavy bolters are the default option for the Predator. Cheap and cheerful. Can fire at infantry if your main weapon's anti-tank. You want to keep the vehicle cheap and focus on, your las cannons in the turret maybe or something like that. And obviously for Imperial Fists, better again because they do become a slightly more consistent marine killing weapon there too. So pretty reasonable option. The Volkite Culverin is a 10-point upgrade, so that would turn both those heavy bolters into Volkite Culverins, which is quite a big anti-infantry upgrade over heavy bolters. So if you are going to use this to shoot at infantry, I would take that almost all the time, unless your Imperial Fists probably are still a defensive weapon and they're, pretty decent at killing infantry. Then you got the heavy flamer option. So really, Predators don't want to be getting close enough to use this. So you're going to not be firing these quite a lot of the time. But if you do want a defensive weapon and you don't think heavy bolters are very good, you don't want to pay the points for other weapons, and you just want something defensive, maybe you're playing a defensive army, you could take these. Probably where they get really good, though, is when you're playing Salamanders or Death Guard, when you can upgrade them into Dragon's Breath or Alchem Heavy Flamers, and they're actually worth a little bit more at that point. And I would probably consider these in those armies because you actually do get quite a bit of value out of them, and they're free as well. And then there's the last cannon option, which is also 10 points, the same as the Volkite Culverins. Strangely cheap compared to all the other stuff on this vehicle. Very difficult from a, optimization point of view, or just looking at what you get for the points you pay, not to put these on every Predator. Because even if you're shooting at infantry, even if you're just shooting at Marines in power armor, 2 las cannons is going to do about the same as 2 Volkites is going to do, because it's going to wound on a 2, it's going to go through feel no pain, it's going to instant death go through their armor. They're pretty good at that, and obviously they can kill tanks and everything as well. Very difficult not to just automatically glue these onto the vehicle when you build it, unless you really want different visuals on the vehicle. And then there's the Pintle weapon options as well, which are, in most cases, I would generally not recommend using because they make the vehicle a bit expensive, but there are some ways to make these worthwhile. So first is the Multi-Melter, 20 points, not a super expensive option for increasing the firepower of the vehicle. Remember, it's pinnacle mounted, so it can always defensive fire, 360 degree arc of fire as well. You have got to be careful not to make your vehicle too expensive, by putting this on too. But if your vehicle's got some other options on it, maybe you've kept it cheap with a Predator autocannon, 2 las cannons, you could take this and give it some extra firepower as well. It's not bad. I'm also going to mention the heavy bolter option as well. So whilst I generally wouldn't pay 10 points for a heavy bolter, it is good in Iron Warriors because you can make it a shrapnel cannon. So that gives you a pinning option. So wherever else the tank does, you can make this a shrapnel cannon, defensive fire at some infantry, maybe force a pin, which is great. And also if you're Imperial Fist as well and you're trying to make a machine gun Predator, not the worst thing in the world. 10 points for a ballistic skill 2, effectively heavy bolter, is a little bit better as well. Plus it looks kind of cool. And much in the same vein, the heavy flamer as well. Not a bad throw-in for cheap if you've got spare points generally at 5 points. So almost any Predator you could throw this in if you were looking to spend the last 5 points in your army maybe. But again, if you are Salamanders or Death Guard, and maybe you want to make a flame wagon to drive around, you got them flamer turrets already. Also, getting a heavy flamer upgraded Sponson as well would be pretty cool. Pintle weapon would be pretty cool as well. Alright, so now we've looked at the weapon options, let's look at things you should think about when you're deciding how to arm your Predator. So first of all, don't make it too expensive. Around 150, 160 points is the most you really want to spend. It is only an armor 13 vehicle, and it has only got 3 hit points. So there are lots of armies in the game that can kill these very easily. So while you can go to town on maximum las cannons and a multi-melter and a dozer blade and a searchlight and everything else, you probably want to keep it cheapish is the name of the game for really getting the most value out of these. Do build your loadout for shooting a specific target type as well. You do want to have a role in mind when you put one of these in your army. The Predator can mix and match targets reasonably well, thanks to using the Sponson rules and angling the vehicle to shoot multiple targets, also defensive fire, also the number of guns it's got that can be defensively fired. So it can split fire quite well, but you don't want to go into a battle doing that because, those have got restrictions on the way you angle it. Your opponent might not play nicely and line everything up so you can optimally split your weapons, etc. So don't count on that. but it's a nice thing to be able to do if you do want to split your fire. In terms of squadrons as well, now you can squadron Predators, which makes the base tank 105 points, which is pretty cheap, actually. You know, if the normal Predator was 105 points, they'd be super good and efficient. The problem with squadrons is you make them an even juicier target than they are already. So if you take 4 Predators in a squadron and your opponent's got a unit of 10 las cannons, it can take out multiple Predators in one round of shooting, where if your Predators are sort of separated or in smaller units, your opponent can't easily just blow all your stuff away in one round of shooting. So for me, 2 is the ideal. You get that 1 extra cheap Predator, which means, you know, roughly you've paid like 112.5 points for each Predator, pretty much, which is like quite good. But you haven't gone over the top and exposed your vehicles to being blown up too easily. So on to some recommended loadouts. Well, what I'm going to say is, rather than go through every possible permutation, most of the weapons on this are pretty decent. You know, if you're not playing a super optimized game or optimized list, all of the turret weapons are pretty good, a little bit on the expensive side. The las cannons are particularly good, but all of the weapons can be made to work as well. So you can largely put what you want on your Predator, and it's going to be pretty decent. But there are some very standout loadouts that come to mind, and there's pretty much 2. There's the classic Predator Destructor option, which is the Predator autocannon and 2 las cannons on the side. Excellent firepower, whilst also keeping the tank really cheap at 130 points. And it's just so efficient. The problem is the Predator autocannon's so cheap that all these upgrades on the top are just quite expensive. And the same with the las cannon Sponsons. They're so cheap, it's unsure why you would take anything else if you're trying to be optimal. On the other hand, I really like this loadout. I think it looks classic, looks great on the table. And so, you know, this is the one that I will be building when I build one of these for my Iron Hands. Then you've also got the Predator Annihilator, classically as well. So Gravis las cannon on the top, 2 las cannons on the side. It is a little bit on the expensive side, but it does give you 4 las cannons on a mobile platform that can't be shot by small arms and things as well. And I think this will perform quite well. And again, will probably be quite popular. Interesting to me that what I consider the 2 best loadouts are actually the, you know, more classical Space Marine loadouts as well. There are some other fairly optimal and good loadouts though as well for specific chapters. So Salamanders or Death Guard can certainly use an autocannon on the top, 2 heavy flamers, and a Pintle heavy flamer, which they can upgrade to their special versions depending on which one you're playing. And that gives you quite a fast, you know, the Predator is a fast tank. It can close quite quickly while firing its autocannon if its flamers aren't in range. You can move this defensively to protect troops. You know, you can stick it in the way of things if it gets charged. It's got a good overwatch, that kind of stuff. I think this is quite a cool and interesting way to use the Predator quite effectively. Imperial Fist, autocannon heavy bolters, 120 points, so cheap for the firepower that it puts out. You certainly could upgrade the Sponsons to las cannons as well, as per the previous slide, but this is a very cheap way to run it and quite lore accurate as well. And then for Iron Warriors, they get really interesting Predators, so you get to take an autocannon, shrapnel cannons on the Sponsons, a Pintle shrapnel cannon as well. So you've got 12 pinning shots coming out of that, which is really excellent. And the autocannon can shoot something else while those defensive fire at the nearest target if you want to. That's pretty cool. You can also just take the, again, Predator Destructor loadout and just give it a Pintle shrapnel cannon too, which can just snap off a couple of pinning shots at things too. Iron Warriors do quite well out of anything with a Pintle mounted heavy bolter. So some cool options that you can use there that are quite strong. Before we look at Predator tactics, quick recap on vehicle strengths and weaknesses. So strengths of vehicles, immune to small arms and most standard melee weapons. So there are some places they can go where they can be fairly safe. They're not susceptible to blast weapons in the same way that a unit of 10 heavy weapon guys is. So if you bring your heavy weapons in a vehicle, it's an entire class of weapon that you don't have to worry about as much, particularly with Mechanicum coming on the scene with their big AP3 blast weapons as well. You might be better with some Predators rather than lots of heavy support squads. They can move and fire, which heavy support squads obviously can't, and they can move extra fast if they really need to. And they can't be locked in combat either, which is a good thing. One of the advantages that comes out of being immune to small arms as well is if you need to shoot at something like, you know, an anti-infantry unit, you can shoot them with a Predator safely because they won't be able to hurt you on the return fire. Whereas a unit of heavy weapons, maybe a unit of Volkite Culverins or heavy bolters or assault cannons or something, would take some return fire. So some good strengths for vehicles there. The weaknesses, obviously, they can die in a single shot, in theory. They have limited reactions depending on the weapons they're using, and it can be quite hard to get cover or even avoid return fire sometimes, although the Predator is pretty fast so it can get itself into some nice spots. So basic tactics for the Predator just to think about as well while you're equipping your tank. So the Predator is a light tank. Armor 13 is light in the Horus Heresy. It's not a main battle tank. You don't drive it up the middle of the field and expect it to survive. You use it in a, sneaky, flanky, cutting down on its fire lines, return fire lines kind of way. Keeping it alive to shoot a few times is where you get its value. It's got a decent amount of guns on it, but it's not super efficient for its points. So you don't just want to put it somewhere where it can fire and then just die to an errant las cannon. You use cover and cut down on enemy fire lines where you can. So depending on the board, it is fairly mobile. It can be moved 14 if you really need it to, if you think it's just going to get shot and die and you don't just want to get the shots out. Move it around, keep your enemy guessing, make it hard for those immobile enemy heavy support squads or slow dreadnoughts to manage to keep up with it and shoot it. You are pretty mobile while shooting. You can use your sponsor and defensive weapon rules to split fire up to 3 targets as well, don't forget. Check with your opponent first, whether you agree that that's how it works. Not a big deal if it's not, but effectively with the sponsor rules and the defensive weapon rules, that they're written kind of a little bit weirdly, but between either 2 or 3 targets you can split your weapons with. So if you do need to do that to optimize the Predator's firing, that's a pretty good thing to be able to do. You can also use your armor, as I mentioned in the last slide, to shoot at targets with strong anti-infantry weapons, like a unit of Volkite culverins, and avoid return fire. So even if you've got a Predator with las cannons, if you shoot that at a unit of Volkite culverins, cut down the number of models in the unit, when your other units shoot at that, they're taking less return fire, for example. So you put that armor to use to get value out of being on a vehicle. So in summary, the Predator is a medium price-based tank, not super cheap, but also not super expensive. That can be quite efficient if you don't make it too expensive with the loadout you put on it. Huge amount of variety that you can build however you like and will be good enough to play. There's no real bad weapon options, although not putting las cannons in the Sponson is a pretty big miss, but the turrets you can pretty much use any of them that you like. It does have some very definite optimal loadouts, dare I say, more competitive loadouts, though, because the Predator cannon is a decent weapon but so much cheaper than the other turret options. So, depending on what you think about loading that out, you might want to take that into consideration. One thing I really like about the Predator, though, is it looks awesome. It's a classic looking Space Marine tank, and it really adds variety to the guns in your army. A lot of us who've been playing Heresy 2 have mostly been using Dreadnoughts and Space Marines, the things that are actually out and aren't super expensive. And now we've got some options to vary the army a bit, while still making sure we've got big guns in our armies too. Good alternative to heavy support squads. It's less susceptible to all that powerful anti-infantry that's around in the game because it's got its armor, which is great, which is an advantage for taking it. But also as well, in strict numbers terms, Predator's like a little bit worse than heavy support squads. So if you do want to power down your army or just add some variety to your army, as I've just said, they're a really good option too. That's the end of the show. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do like and subscribe. Leave me a comment down below on YouTube as well. And don't forget to join us on Discord in the Heresy community. The link to that's in the description. I will see you all very soon. Thanks and bye-bye.